Okay, welcome back. We're continuing with Unit 3, Week 3, and in this lecture I'm going to be talking about some of the main design elements that come up based on what we've been talking about in terms of sculpture. Sculpture, first of all, is the art form more than any other that really uses volume or mass, or how we generally refer to it, form. In the art world, the word form means so many different things. So sometimes we might use the word form as in formal, like let's talk about this formally, and we use it to basically mean all of the art elements and all of the design principles altogether. But then we also refer to it to mean a specific art element, such as we talk about the art elements being like line and shape and color and value and form. And there, what we mean by form is we mean the basic three-dimensionalness of three-dimensional works. That is its form, its mass, and its volume to a degree. It's both its positive and its negative volume. So we're going to be talking about all of those things in this lecture with a little bit more in depth, but hopefully this will be somewhat familiar because we've already been talking about this while we were talking about sculpture. So first of all, I want to just say that form and mass are strongly related to the way that sculpture affects us physically and emotionally. Like when we go to see a work of art, there is a significant difference between going to see a work of sculpture versus going to see a painting. And I'm a painter and I love painting, but there is something that a great work of sculpture has that's different because it is like visiting a person. It's truly there in the three-dimensional sense, and so therefore it has presence. This is a great example of a work of art that has an amazing sense of presence. You go there and you're just stunned by its existence, and its presence is in part because of its surface, but it's also in part because of its form and its mass, its scale, its size, all of that. But there are different kinds of presence. And sometimes, for those of us who are trained in art, if we went to see Fountain by Marcel Duchamp, I believe that's the one that's at the Art Institute in Chicago, it has a lot of presence for me, but it may not have a whole lot of presence because I think a lot of the presence for an object like this is knowing the history. Whereas a piece like Donald Judd's stacked boxes here has a sense of presence even if you don't know what it is or when it was made or anything about it. Just it's hovering there, right? The hovering empty space, the sense of each box just kind of floating, and that the negative space that is created is an exact replica of each box itself. That is has its own sense of presence. And in this case, I would say its presence is, in a way, even though it's a relatively large work, is kind of intimate. Another thing that's important to remember is that form there's two types of form. There's actual form, like the actual physical object form. But then in art, there's also depicted form or pictorial form, right? Meaning that in a painting, right, that when we paint it, we can create the illusion that there is an object there. And depending how it's painted, how convincing it is, that can be a really important part of that painting. In this case, like the very believable physical presence of this box, right, that he was using as a writing table. Marat was actually known for writing his letters while he was in the bath. He had a pretty awful skin condition. He was stabbed to death while he was in the bath, which is a pretty awful way to go. But anyway, he had this box for writing, like a little writing table, and this box in the painting has so much presence, right? So much of sense of a believable mass, and that's such an important part of that painting. But pictorial mass can also be quite abstract. Here are two contemporary artists who both play with the illusion of pictorial volume, pictorial mass, but at the same time that there's no real. It's also playfully letting you in on the fact that it's all illusion. With the Auerbach here, you can't tell it from this slide, but if you saw it in person and you were able to see how this entire thing was done by a point-by-point reproduction like a little like dot print of these colors, you would be able to get a sense of how it's kind of both having this very believable sense of volume and form, and at the same time letting you in on the fact that it's a totally unbelievable volume and form. Okay, so that's part of it. And like I said before, negative volume is a really important part of this sense of presence. Here are various sculptors who, in different kind of ways, use negative volume as a major part of your piece. I'm a huge fan of Rachel White-Reed right here with this piece right here, and what she's doing is she made a sculpture of the negative space of a stairway. So this is like if you took a stairway and then you made a cast of it, and then you cast a positive sculpture to be all the empty space in a stairway, this is what you would get. So there are different ways of works of art engaging with space. One of the things to remember is that sometimes something simple and seemingly quite enclosed, right, like this cycladic piece, is still very powerfully engaging with the space around it. So it doesn't have to be super dramatic or dynamic or have to have like really massive negative volumes to be engaging with its space and with the volume around it. But here are some other ways of engaging with volume. I think that in both of these examples, especially Gupta's pieces, because they're assembled and because they feel kind of like they're just growing right in front of you out of this collection of objects, they have this sense of like they're invading space. They almost feel like they're like expanding out into your space. You can see that even more like with this piece by Gupta, where the pieces are literally flowing out of one room into another room. Okay, so lastly, just one more time to talk about why, or in the last lecture we spent a good deal of time talking about the difference between, you know, freestanding versus in the round versus fully in the round. And I hope now that you kind of understand that this is not just simply like an academic discussion. This is a really important issue for sculptors in terms of how much they want and their work to engage, in what ways they want their work to engage the space around them. Okay, that ends part one. I'll get to part two.